Oh, we just had someone else join, so. Okay. All right, well, welcome you guys. I'm excited. I see lots of familiar faces. So thanks for coming and being regulars at this. And it's fun to do these for Provo Canyon Behavioral Hospital. So today we're going to talk about trauma-informed care, the impact of a trauma-informed culture. And I think trauma-informed care is kind of a buzzword that we hear a lot in this industry. And so we're going to talk about it in kind of a different fashion. And I want to ask, and maybe people can throw this in the chat or you can jump in. Anyone who's been to one of mine, I really like for you guys to talk. But what do you think when you think trauma-informed care? Like, what is trauma-informed care? What does that even mean? Any thoughts?
I would think it's keeping in mind the effects trauma can have as part of what they're going through when they're talking to you.
Yeah. That is a huge part. And there's this, and tailoring treatment to understand people come from hard places. So people are, safety is part of it. Yeah. So we're going to really talk about the trauma-informed care is different than trauma treatment. So we have trauma treatments and trauma interventions, and then we have trauma-informed care, which is a culture. It's the environment that we create. It's more of like this overarching philosophy that directs our treatment. So someone had put safety, which yes, it emphasizes safety. Healing happens in safe and collaborative relationships. You know, those are the big things that we're talking about. And then trauma-informed care as a culture change is really what we're kind of focused on today. And what's interesting is it's not like a single checklist. We don't have like, okay, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you're trauma-informed. It's very much a culture and a philosophy, and it takes a little while to create. And so when we think about this today, and when we're talking about this, I want you to think about trauma-informed care and I know everybody's coming from different environments. So we have some mental health authorities, we have private practice, we have schools, we have hospitals, we have residential treatment, we have IOPs. I'm sure we have some nurses on here. We have a variety of different people and different organizations. So think about this in terms of your organization, your individual approach, as well as your, say, your private practice, your practices approach. If you're a hospital, you look overall at the culture of your hospital. So that's what we're really talking about today. So it's looking at how do we stay aware, conscious, and pay attention to how we're intentionally practicing with our patients. And there's some great comments in this chat, so I appreciate that. So my favorite thing, I think, is it's so easy to say, like when somebody interacts with you, you can go, what is wrong with you? I don't know how many people have thought that. What is wrong with you? Like, why? I think that when people cut me off, like on the freeway, I'm like, what is wrong with you? What? But this trauma-informed language and concept is that we're moving from that idea of what's wrong with you to what happened to you, to help understand that there's things that have happened to us in our lives that impact the people that we become, the way that we behave, what we do. And so like there's one that this last comment says, understanding how the nervous system deals with threats to safety, and then working to create a culture that supports nervous system regulation. It's beautifully stated. And that's really when we start looking at the people that we're interacting with this lens of what happened in your life that made it so that you react to this scenario in that fashion. That's really what trauma-informed care is in a nutshell. And so this also applies to those people around us, to our coworkers, to the other individuals that we're interacting with when we talk about overall cultural change. So does anyone else think what's wrong with you? By show of hands. Sometimes. Like every so often it comes up and you're like, So what I'm just challenging you to do is when you think about that, start moving that into that language of what happened. Then when we start, we want to begin with the end in mind. We want to begin with this idea that we're heading in a direction. We have a goal. And so we know that in that, sometimes we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes, things are going to happen that don't work out, but we're trying to really focus on the beginning with the end in mind, especially as we're working as leaders or as owners of a private practice or administrators in schools, facilities, really looking at how do we lead. So I think that, I don't know, several years ago, 20 years ago, I think there started to become this movement of, we kind of understand trauma isn't great. We've really started to, at that point, started to get an understanding. Previous to that, we had people who really didn't get it. They would say, oh, kids are super resilient, so they'll get over things. It's no big deal, etc. And even Bruce Perry, in his book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, he entered into a crime scene, and there was first responders there. And there was a homicide that had taken place in the home, and the children were still in the house. And he said to the first responders, he said, wait, why are the kids still in this house right now? And they said, oh, they're kids, they're resilient. This isn't going to impact them at all. So really over the course, and he was like, I don't buy that. We got to get them out of here. But that was a new thought at that point. So when you start to look at where we are now, we really have moved a lot further in this whole understanding that trauma is really costly. It's widespread. It impacts. We know that it particularly impacts kids, impacts brain development. We have that understanding now. And I think sometimes that's where some of our understanding ends. I've even had people tell me, well, they're traumatized, so it's really hard to hold them accountable to their behaviors. I can't really say, well, that wasn't a great choice. Instead, we sometimes feel that need to make excuses for their behavior and just say, yeah, it's fine, you can do whatever you want. But that's not helpful for them either. It's not helpful for anybody because the world doesn't look at it that way. So we really have to develop this sense of understanding that we know that we've been traumatized. We know that 90% of the US population, adult population, has experienced at least one traumatic event in their life. And I don't know how many of you felt that COVID was a little bit traumatizing. We've all been through something difficult. So when we think, thanks, Daniel, I see your hand. When we look at it, we can start to say, let's just consider that 100% of the people that we're coming into contact with are likely to have experienced something traumatizing, something difficult that's impacting. And we look at the ACE study. Everybody's probably familiar with that ACE study, that adverse childhood events study, and noting that our stress and our traumatic events and these difficulties impact us physically, they impact us emotionally, they impact our relationships. And as we try to define trauma, the thing that I really like about the definition of trauma, at least, this particular definition of trauma, is it's this actual or threatened death or serious injury to one's physical integrity. But then we talk about the witnessing of that. And then we talk about learning about unexpected violent death, serious harm. And then we talk about experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of that traumatic event. So when we think about that, therapists, nurses, our mental health techs that are working in facilities, do they hear teachers? Do we hear about trauma? Do we hear the details? So this is very applicable to all of us that work in this mental health field. And we need to be aware of our own responses and our own reactions and how all of this information that comes at us is impacting us as well. So I think that's a really important piece of this. And yes, somebody just wrote, reminds me of 9/11 and all of the media coverage and folks watching it over and over. Yeah, that was super traumatizing to us as a society in general. And we just have to look, this impacts us. And yeah, Stacey, I do. I think that people say trauma for everything. And then they're like, oh, I'm having a trigger and, all of those things. I believe we've overused it. Yeah. But I also believe that as a society, we're really struggling with some difficult things. So there's somewhere in the middle that, we have to get to, and we have to develop some empathy and understanding around it. So when we look at like potential traumatic events, I think these are the things we really know. These are the things we really understand. It's abuse, it's loss, it's like, we get those too, the natural disasters, we get abandonment issues, sexual abuse, bullying. We talked about bullying this last month here on these trainings. War, we've thought about that. But sometimes I think we also miss some of the chronic stressors that have happened. Like we really miss racism. I think we're doing a little bit better, but I think we've not totally understood that. And gender bias, we don't always understand that. And then how communities as a whole experience trauma. And I think those are significant things that we need to pay attention to. Adriana says, trauma is an opportunity to grow, to develop new skills and learn from it. Some people use the traumatic event to excuse their behavior, developing a victim attitude. Yeah, I mean, trauma is an opportunity to grow. We've talked about post-traumatic growth as well in some of these trainings previously. And I totally agree. We can learn from our trauma. I'm never going to thank my trauma. I'm never going to thank those negative experiences and be like, bring it on, give me more. But I think there is an approach we can take to that. For sure. So SAMHSA says, let's define trauma with 3 E's. And it's saying that the event or circumstances causes the trauma. So we know that, we identified some of those events. And then an individual's experience of the event determines whether it's traumatic or not. And I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of times that I'm interacting with somebody and I'm saying, wow, that sounds really traumatic. That sounds like a really difficult situation. And then there's another person who comes in and in my judgment, I'm like, that doesn't sound all that traumatic. That doesn't seem that significant. Why are there these trauma responses to it? But that's not really our call. It's not really our call to determine whether or not somebody is traumatized or not. It's just not up to us. It's the individual's perception that determines whether it was traumatic or not. And then we see the effects. The effects of trauma have these long-lasting effects on our mental, our physical, our social, our emotional, our spiritual well-being. And so we've got some great comments coming in too. But yeah, we need to meet them where they are. And really, we process trauma differently. And I think that's a huge part of this. is really paying attention. And that's a very trauma-informed concept, is to meet them where they are. And we understanding and empathy is a huge part, as we have a comment that says, we have to look at. But I think sometimes there's an event that can be considered very traumatizing. And maybe those events, those effects don't happen. Those long-term effects don't play out. And that can be about how the world around them responded to them. So we just need to pay attention to that. And then we're looking at like the people that we are serving. Let's say 100% have some sort of traumatic event and there's some sort of impact on us. And then let's look at ourselves. Let's look at our compassion fatigue. Let's look at how we start to view people. Let's pay attention. I know I personally, I don't watch the news anymore. I haven't for like 10 years. I very rarely watch the news because I don't find that there's anything that's super beneficial to my life on there. And it's exhausting. So we've talked about the effect. We can talk about like the assumptions of trauma as well. Like this person's sick and they're weak and they're damaged and they have poor coping skills. And when we start to put the assumption, take the assumptions and build in understanding, we can say, oh, this is a consequence of trauma. That there's limited social skills, there's limited ability to self-soothe, they're trying to have needs met. So it allows us to understand it in a different way, which I think allows us to hold them accountable, as someone's noting in here. Let's hold them accountable, but with compassion. Let's understand, maybe they've never learned that. So let's walk them through the process of teaching them that. And let's assume that everybody has some sort of trauma and there's some universal precautions that we can pay attention to. I'm looking at our comments. Yes, behavior is communication. And there was a comment on PTSD and 40% of combat veterans coming back with PTSD. And I'm not totally sure. I can honestly say I'm not totally sure about that study. So that's an interesting one. But I do think that sometimes it really is. I remember years ago, I read something that said when folks came back from like World War II and they had a different response because they talked about a lot of the things that they saw with the other soldiers when they were traveling back from the war. Whereas now you can be in a war zone and then the next day be home with your family. And so there's not a lot of transitioning from one environment to another. And so one of the studies I read said in World War II, them talking to each other and having that experience to process and seeing that other people were having some reactions allowed them to have some empathy and healing, which is an interesting concept. So we have the 4 R's. That's also from SAMHSA. And I think that's the realization that trauma impacts organizations, communities, individuals, ourselves. Recognize those signs of trauma. We could name lots of signs of trauma, right? Things that we know. How do we respond? Do we respond with empathy? Do we respond throughout our organizations in an appropriate manner? And do we resist re-traumatization? Do we pay attention to things that might re-traumatize individuals? You know, sometimes we don't always pay attention when I'm talking with like an acute hospital or a admission coming first day. Even imagine walking first day into your new IOP or your outpatient session. That can feel very vulnerable and stressful and overwhelming. And for us that are working in those environments, we're like, oh yeah, that's a Wednesday, that's a Monday, that's not that big of a deal. So how we respond to them and how we treat them and how we explain the process can be really significant in not re-traumatizing. I was going to show a video, but I'm not going to, but I'm going to encourage you all to go to, if you haven't seen it, Brene Brown talks about empathy, and somebody put it all in animation. And so I'm just going to encourage you guys to go just type YouTube and Brene Brown empathy video. But she really talks about like the 4 areas of empathy, how we stay out of judgment, how we have perspective taking, recognizing the emotions in others, and communicating our recognition of their emotions. It's like 2 minutes and 13 seconds, but I want to make sure that you guys have that resource. So the interesting thing as we're going through all of this is that SAMHSA has found that businesses are also saying we really have to look at how we interact with the people that we serve, with our customers, with other people. Like, how can we do things in a trauma-informed manner and with your employees? But I think also like a car insurance company, like how State Farm interacts with us after a car accident is huge, right? It determines whether or not people are experiencing some sort of trauma reaction to it. So I think it's an interesting move that maybe, I don't want us to move all the way over that we think everything is traumatizing, as people have commented like that. But there are ways that we can interact with one another that are, yes, healthcare, how insurance companies deal with us as providers would be really nice. Yes, I agree, Lisa. Yeah, if we could start doing that, imagine the difference that we could make overall. And sorry, Megan, you have your hand up. I don't know if I've missed something, but would you like to say something, or do you just have your hand up from an earlier?
I was just raising my hand earlier when you said raise of hands.
Awesome. I just didn't want to miss a comment. So the CDC and SAMHSA decided to give us 6 guiding principles to a trauma-informed approach. And that's what we're going to talk about. So as comments, questions, etc., we'll go through each one of these. Yes, we'll type the name of the video clip for sure. Okay, so let's go through. Somebody mentioned earlier, principle 1 in a trauma-informed environment is safety. So that seems like an obvious one, right? We need to be physically and emotionally safe. So what are ways that the environment that you work in and that you provide service in is emotionally safe? Anybody? What's something that you do?
So we have like snacks and water that the kids can get when they come in, and we have like warm blankets and pillows and comfy places for them to sit that they can cuddle with while we do their intake, and they can we always offer them to take a shower if they want to.
That's awesome. Because you imagine like how significant that is. Having just, a space that feels super safe. So, and people are saying, yeah, the quiet, welcoming waiting area, having good staff, keeping enough staff, doing mindfulness exercises in the beginning, showing empathy, that reminding them this is a safe place, us being calm. That's huge because our limbic systems all talk to each other, right? So they know when we're not calm, when we're overwhelmed. Yeah, let them choose where they sit, ask about the temperature, snacks, fidget toys. These are great comments. So, I mean, safety, that seems like a really, it's important, and it's a great one and pretty easy to accomplish in a lot of ways if we're intentional. So then trustworthiness and transparency. So how do we come across as authentic? How do we come across as worthy of trust to those we serve? Tiffany wrote clear policy so they know what to expect and they're not caught off guard. That's a great one. Yeah, really being transparent in what we do with those policies. What about if we screw something up? I think when we screw up, we can apologize. I think that this in like a private practice is like your informed consent. Clarifying limits to confidentiality. That's a great example, Maggie. That's an important one. We want to know how that, and that also helps with safety. Take ownership for the things that we do wrong, apologize, fix it. Yeah. Letting kids in the hospital visit, call their parents and have them involved in their care. Yeah, that's huge too. It's huge. And it changes the whole approach that we have towards the treatment process when we're sitting and doing that. And as leaders in organizations as well, us figuring out how can we, with our employees, have this as well, this trustworthiness and transparency. How do we treat one another? Those are important pieces. Okay, this one is this idea of peer support. And this is one that it takes a minute to really understand this one, I think, because I think, and I've said this so many times, I really would like to go to SAMHSA and say this peer support idea, like we got to come up with a better name for it, because I keep thinking it's like the peer counseling in high school or something like that. And that's not even close to what this is. I mean, I guess it is a little teeny tiny bit, but it's really not. So it's this idea that there's persons with lived experience that we can learn from. It's the idea that we can have experts because of their experience. So NAMI has done a great job of this. It's something that NAMI really builds their programs on. But it's the idea that somebody who has experienced trauma, they talk to us and they share information on, hey, when I came in, this, you know, if this had happened, if somebody had greeted me, or if I'd understood this, it would have helped me a lot more. And then us changing how we do things based on some of that information. And we're not going to meet every single person's needs. We can't say, well, if I got $1 million when I walked in, then I would have felt way less traumatized. We're not saying that. We're looking at reasonable ideas that they offer. So one of my most favorite experiences was I worked with somebody who was transitioning from female to male, and they told me and gave me some insights into some of the policies and procedures that we had in a facility about some of the binding procedures that I, really didn't know anything about, but they felt very safe and comfortable, and that we could talk about this, and gave ideas and helped us write new policies around it so that it was a safe process. So that's one of my favorite experiences that I've had along these lines. But can people think about or come up with some ideas of how peer support could be something that you utilize in your organization or that you already do? This is a tougher one. Asking peers if they need extra support during hard clients. Yeah, that's a good one. Because it's also us supporting one another. So that's a good one in there. So, and it's enhancing that collaboration. One that I'm going to guess a lot of you already do is that you have patients that are involved in their treatment planning process. Yeah, the grand families and straightening family programs are great, so everyone can support each other through their process. Yeah. Well, and one of the things we hear is like when people enter into this treatment process, there's a lot of there's a lot of issues that come along with that. There's a lot of fears, there's a lot of emotions that come along. So having a place where just as this person's saying, using program graduates to come back and offer support to current clients. Yeah, that's a great one and a perfect example. So then principle 4 is this idea of collaboration and mutuality. So this is identifying this idea that, and a lot of you have commented that healing happens in relationships. And we know that. And so let's look at all the relationships, all the touch points when somebody is entering in treatment. Ooh, people are still commenting on peer support. So knowing I'm not alone, someone else has gone through what I'm going through and here to help me, offering a warm line to talk to somebody who's trained as a volunteer, but not necessarily clinician. Family peer support specialists offered at no cost. Yeah, those are great ones. These are just like, it's how you wrap around that support. And it really fits well with this collaboration and mutuality idea. Because we're saying everybody has a role to play. So how many people have gone to a doctor's office and like the receptionist or like the nurse that does your blood pressure is really kind and caring, and it makes you feel like the whole office is kind and caring, versus one that you walk in and you meet the receptionist and they're like, here you go, sit down, I don't know, whatever. And you sit down and you're like, this place sucks. This is not a welcoming situation at all. I've left a doctor's office because I was like, this receptionist is really so difficult to work with. I can't do this anymore. Even when I'd call, like they just weren't kind. So we think about it, there's a lot of invisible roles that happen in our service delivery that people don't think about. So you think about when I go to like an acute hospital and I say, who are those people that maybe the patients talk to that nobody's aware? They always say dietary and housekeeping. Because dietary is feeding and serving food, and that makes a huge difference. And then you see housekeeping, like if you've been in the hospital, the person who comes in and takes out your trash and picks up, whatever is dirty in your room or changes your linens or whatever, they make a difference. And I think it's important that we recognize that. We recognize that throughout an organization, that everyone plays a role. So, any thoughts on how to be more collaborative as a staff in an organization, in a school? Like, I think about the school, the folks that do your attendance in schools. That's huge. Because they're getting these calls from parents, and parents are like, my kid won't come to school. How that person that's doing the attendance responds makes a huge difference in this whole process with that. And Stacy says, I love all your comments, Stacy. Thank you. She says, actually asking for and listening to the feedback of staff. Yes. Making sure the material needs of staff are met. Yeah. Those are great ones. How do we take care of each other? I had an organization say, I really, really don't like that we can't get the pens that I want. And once we got the pens that they wanted, they felt really cared about. And so it's, it's a really important piece of it. And David's saying, supporting staff is huge. I can't model safe behavior if I'm not regulated myself. So helping staff get their daily dose of dopamine. Yeah. It's really significant. Okay, so empowerment, voice, and choice. So this idea is this idea of, do we believe in healing? So I don't know how many people working in this field have ever felt burnt out or cynical or just like healing never happens. Nothing ever changes. here they come in again and they're saying the same thing and they didn't do their therapy homework and I'm pretty much done. Yeah. Somebody else is like me and has had that experience and said me. So yeah, we get there, frequent flyers. Yeah. So when we're at that place, what do we need to do for ourselves? Because if we believe that healing happens in relationships, I love it that, yeah, this field, we get overwhelmed and we get dysregulated. So what do we do at those moments? Self-care, that's Helen's suggestion. Yeah, we have to stay intentionally aware of what we're doing, because we send out messages and we then, when we're not believing in healing, in people's resiliency, we lose this big part of our influence in the therapy room, as we're interacting with our clients. We lose that. Yes. Taking advantage of employees' wellness programs. Building the relationship, seeing the client. I think this is a lot of times when we have to go back to what happened to them, that's why this is going on, and get that perspective back and get back to the relationship with them. Yeah, maybe change is too hard. Maybe it's too scary. And let the client know I'm struggling with helping them and ask them to help me. That's beautiful, Gina. Yeah. Spending that time really investing, saying, let's not look at it like as therapists that we're up here and our clients are here. How do we get back to the place that we can, really work together and say, let's collaborate on this. Let's make some shared decisions. Because a lot of times we have been at a place where the power differential is this, and our clients are in that place and they've been experiencing that. And so when we start giving them a voice and we let them get empowered, then I think it's a huge process. And the other concept in this is that it's a parallel process for staff and patients. So when we're in, and this is more in a facility, but I think it also applies in outpatient clinics as well. It's whoever is the leader, how they're treating the employees is a lot of times how the patients get treated. And we can see that in families. We talk about how parents come home, they're frustrated from work or something, and they come home and they take that out on their kids. It used to be like when I was going through undergrad, we would talk about like coming home and kicking the dog or something, because we're frustrated about things. Yep, it's a very top-down approach. So if we start looking at this, we really enhance our ability to influence change by looking at that top-down approach. And then principle 6 is cultural, historical, and gender issues. So can we move past, and this really applies to those cultural stereotypes and our individual biases and our individual beliefs and things that have happened to us. Can we look at our reactions, our belief systems, and we can say, okay, I'm going to move past this bias that maybe I'm feeling or have been taught. And can I move past those stereotypes? And can I understand historical trauma that has happened in communities? So we really look at all of these areas: race, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, gender identity, the region that somebody's from, and that patient-client power differential as well. Can we look at all of those things and consider how that's playing out within our organization? Those are really important pieces of this. Any thoughts on this area? And I do know the link just went in for the evaluation form. But any thoughts on how we pay attention to understanding somebody's cultural, historical, or gender issues? I hear somebody coming off of mute, but maybe they just went back on.
Yeah, just briefly, I was just thinking like having accountability, because we have a program where parents need to pick the kids up at the end of the day. And in the idea of like socioeconomic status, certain parents don't have that privilege to leave work at 2:30. And the other day I found myself annoyed that a parent was late, and I had to be reminded by someone, hey, they're probably coming from work. It doesn't mean they're negligent, right? So I think just holding each other accountable and reminding one another, and
Yeah.
As a staff, just for that cultural diversity piece.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful example. Yeah, it's a really great example. Thank you for sharing that.
I have something too.
Yes, jump in.
I think understanding where your biases are coming from and seeing where you are naive is really good, because then you'll be able to discuss it with people that have those issues. And so if you notice like a crater in your knowledge of a certain subject, or you're like, I don't fully understand, and you understand like, hey, this is a gap in my knowledge, then you can go to people and say, hey, like, you can go to people that have struggled with that or that know more about that subject and learn from them. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great, it really is. It's a great comment. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think there's this idea of cultural humility, and it really is. Can we be humble enough to say, you know what? Tell me about your experience. What's been your experience in this situation? Can you explain it? I haven't had that experience. Can you help me understand yours? And I think that's a big one, especially with our clients, of really creating an environment of trust where we can ask them and then appreciate that and utilize that knowledge in the interventions that we're having with, that we're doing with them. So Stacy says, asking an intake, preferred name, pronouns, but also explaining that legally certain names, paperwork has to be honored, keeping parents involved in the gender identity pronoun name process. Yeah, this is a tricky one, but yeah, it's asking those things, and it's having those conversations of, we're going to do our best to utilize this. I know that the insurance company doesn't know your preferred name and pronoun. We're going to use that with them as much as we possibly can, but we may have to also use your legal name at this moment in time with them. So it's acknowledging those things sometimes. I like this idea, watching documentaries or movies regarding topics or populations you're not familiar with. I think especially like historical documentaries, when you start understanding how things have occurred in society, it really helps us to understand that. So it's a great one. Then I just said here, there's no greater intelligence than kindness and empathy. And I think if we take that approach to the people that we're serving, then we touch on those 6 areas. So if we can just say, okay, what happened to you? Take that approach as our common language and apply that to our coworkers, the people that we're working with, that we're around, our clients, other people, and ourselves. I think we need to ask ourselves, what happened to me that's making me feel so scared or worried or nervous at this time? Have that self-compassion. Then we move into creating safety. We move into trust, transparency. We move into inviting peer support and knowledge from people. We then move into collaborating and mutuality. We then move to empowering people. And then we're open to being culturally humble and taking that information and looking at the historical, gender, and cultural factors. And that's really the method. These are like these guide they're the guiding principles of trauma-informed care and of creating this culture. So I appreciate your comments today. It's been so great. Thank you so much. In this, I also have like several pages of resources and articles and websites that you can go to get more information. Any questions, comments? Oh, there is a question. I have a lot of supervisors, therapists that have greatly mistreated me when they should know better. What do you suggest to try and change that situation? Top down is very broken. That's a big question, Stacy. I think that we look at what we can control. So as supervisors, as therapists ourselves, somebody wants me to go back to the video. I think it's important to look at what we can do and how we can change. And I think it's also sharing that feedback with people sometimes. And that feels very vulnerable to do that. But I think when we start making the change process, it'll be really important to share our experiences. If nobody else have, thank you guys for your nice words too. But I could play this video. We do have 4 minutes, but I know a lot of people want to need to head back into their next thing. Joseph, what was the code word?
I'll post it in the chat again. It's
okay.
Trauma 1011.
There you go. I see how you did that. Trauma on 1011.
Yeah, and also I saw a question earlier. A couple of people had issue with trying to access the evaluation from this chat.
Yes.
Don't worry, you can reach out to me. I'll post my email one more time here in the chat. Just email me at joseph.turk@uhsinc.com and I will send a link to you directly. That seems to fix a lot of the problems sometimes that people have with trying to access it through the chat. And if there's another email too you want me to use, like if you have a personal Gmail or something like that, I can send it there as well. That sometimes helps too.
Yeah. So if there's anybody who wants to stay, I can play the video and hopefully it will work. It's embedded in this. But it really is a great one.
And if you can't stay, what I plan on doing is also including a link to the video when I send out the certificates and the slides. So that way, if you do happen to miss it, you'll catch it there as well.
Yeah. It's a great one. Okay, I'm going to play it. Let's hope that it works once it's in here. Okay, hang on, it'll take a second. It worked earlier, so I'm crossing my fingers. Technology is eluding me right now. Okay, I'm going to try putting it in a different thing. I don't know, Joseph. Now it's playing something else.
Yeah, we can include the link later as well if it doesn't work.
On the share screen, Jennifer, you might have to change which tab or window it's connected to.
That's what it's looking like. And this is why I didn't do it, because this is not working. Ah! I apologize, you guys. It is not playing the right thing.
The other option could be to see if Joseph can share his screen maybe and play it.
There we go. There we go. Hang on, it is now going to play. Something crazy happened. But can you guys see that at all? Okay. All right, let me share my screen again. And I think it's gonna work. That's why I was like, I'm not gonna play it earlier. And there we go. Now can you see it, Joseph?
Yeah, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, there we go. So it sounds like some of you could hear and some of you couldn't hear, so I apologize for that. But I really feel like, and I just put the link in there, I really feel like it's such a great resource and can help so much when we just start focusing on that empathy piece and what that really means. So I apologize if you couldn't hear that. I did put the link in the chat, and really you just go to YouTube and type in Brene Brown empathy and you will find it. It's the first thing that comes up. Thanks so much, everybody. Could you hear it, Joseph?
I couldn't hear it, no. But I was reading the subtitles though, those helped.
Okay. Well, that's a bummer because it's way better with the audio.
I figure we'll all just click that link.
Yeah. But if you can put that in, that would be awesome.
Definitely. I'll include the link when I send out the certificates.
Yeah. It's a great one. We have somebody that's just entering the waiting room. Maybe they got kicked out.
It's okay.
Oh yeah, it was Julie, you got kicked out, huh? And you came back.
She's back.
Yeah. I was like, she's been here the whole time. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions or anything like that, I think we're good. Do you need anything from me, Joseph?
I think we're good. I think everyone's got the code, everyone's got the link, and if not, they have my email that they can reach out to me. If you have any problems or any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always willing to work with people and see the best way that we can get you to take the evaluation and figure something out. So please reach out if you run into any issues, okay? And I just want to thank, on behalf of everyone, thank Jennifer again for the wonderful job that she did with this presentation. Very informative, very educational. And I like all the feedback that everyone put in the chat too. That was very good that everyone's kind of participating and throwing things out there. That's what really gets us thinking and learning. So thank you again to everyone participating.
Yeah, these groups are so great. I always appreciate their willingness to be involved. All right.
All right, if there's no other questions, we will say goodbye to everyone, and we'll make sure this gets uploaded to YouTube in a few days as well. So if you missed anything or you want to go back and review it, don't worry. I'll also be sending out the slides with the certificate as well. So
Thanks, Joseph.
all right, thanks, Jennifer.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.